That's completely out of touch and insult to the intelligence of the American people and life experience.
A man in a hood, backpack on his shoulder, walking calmly down a Manhattan sidewalk in the early morning dark. He didn't run. That's the part that still gets people. Most killers bolt. This one just walked away, blended into the city like he'd done it 100 times before. 6 days later, he was eating a McMuffin in a McDonald's 500 kilometers away. Recognized not by a detective, but by an employee who thought he looked kind of familiar. This is the story of Luigi Mangione, the Ivy League graduate accused of gunning down a healthcare CEO in cold blood and somehow becoming a folk hero to millions of strangers online, while he waits for 3 separate trials that could put him away for life. Let's break down exactly what happened. Part 1, the morning it happened. It's December 4th, 2024. Early morning, Midtown Manhattan. Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, one of the largest health insurance companies in the entire country, is walking toward the Hilton Hotel. He's there for something completely routine, his company's annual investor conference, the kind of event that happens every year that no one thinks twice about. He never makes it inside. A man steps out from the sidewalk, raises a pistol, and fires several rounds into Thompson's back and leg. Thompson stumbles, collapses. Bystanders scream, and the shooter, calm, deliberate, almost eerily unhurried, simply turns and walks away. Not runs. Walks. He disappears into the pre-dawn Manhattan crowd, like he was just another commuter heading to the subway. Brian Thompson is pronounced dead a short time later. He was 50 years old. He had a wife. He had 2 kids back home in Minnesota, who had no idea that morning that they'd never see their father again. And for the next several days, New York City had absolutely no idea who did it. Part 2, the manhunt. What police did have was a face, partially. Surveillance cameras caught the shooter earlier that morning, sitting inside a Starbucks near the crime scene, mask pulled down just enough to sip a drink. That one careless moment became the single most circulated image in America for almost a week. They also had the gun, or more specifically, they had shell casings, and scratched onto them, almost like a message, were 3 words: deny, defend, depose. Words that read like a mission statement. Words that, to a lot of people online, sounded less like a random act of violence and more like a protest. Because here's the thing, almost immediately, this didn't feel like a typical crime story to the public. People started connecting dots to their own healthcare horror stories. Denied claims, bankrupting medical bills, insurance companies fighting tooth and nail not to pay for treatment. Whoever this shooter was, a huge number of strangers online weren't hoping he'd get caught. They were quietly hoping he'd get away. Investigators eventually traced a backpack the shooter had ditched in Central Park. Inside it, a water bottle, a granola bar wrapper, enough for a DNA sample. They also found he'd used a fake ID to check into a hostel days before the shooting, and had actually flirted with the front desk worker while wearing a mask. That, for one photo, briefly slipped down. Then came the break that cracked the entire case open. Not from a lab, not from a detective, but from a fast food restaurant nearly 500 kilometers away. Part 3, the arrest. Altoona, Pennsylvania. A regular Monday morning at a McDonald's, a customer is sitting quietly by himself, hood up, eating breakfast, scrolling on his phone. An employee glances over and does a double take. He looks exactly like the guy from the news. She calls the police, officers arrive, and the man doesn't cause a scene. He's polite, almost too calm. When they ask for ID, he gives them a fake one. It's only when they search his bag that everything falls apart. A ghost gun, matching the caliber used in the shooting, a suppressor, and a fake New Jersey ID that matched the one used to check into that Manhattan hostel days earlier. His real name comes out, Luigi Mangione. 26 years old at the time. Ivy League graduate, University of Pennsylvania, no less. valedictorian of his private high school, former startup employee. Someone who, on paper, looked like one of the last people you'd expect to be sitting in a Pennsylvania jail cell, charged with murder. And then investigators find the notebook. Part 4. The notebook. Inside his backpack, prosecutors say, was a red spiral notebook filled with handwritten entries, reportedly detailing frustration with the American healthcare system, and specifically naming United Healthcare as a target. There was also a folded letter, addressed simply to the feds, that prosecutors have called a confession. In it, according to court filings, Mangione allegedly wrote that he acted completely alone. No accomplices, no wider plot, and again vented about the state of the insurance industry. This is where the case stops being just a murder story and turns into something much bigger, a cultural flashpoint, because almost overnight Mangione wasn't just a murder suspect to a huge slice of the internet. He became a symbol. Fan pages went up. People started selling merchandise with his face on it. Crowdfunding pages for his legal defense raised staggering amounts of money in days. Strangers who had never met him were calling him a hero for standing up to an industry a lot of Americans feel has failed them. Legal experts point out something important here, though. Motive isn't something prosecutors technically have to prove to win a murder case. But it absolutely helps. As one attorney following the case put it, a documented grudge against the exact company Thompson ran gives a jury a very clear, very human reason to believe the man in the courtroom is the man who pulled the trigger. Mangione has pleaded not guilty to everything, in every courtroom, every single time. Part 5. 3 courtrooms, 1 man. Here's where this case gets genuinely complicated, because Luigi Mangione isn't just facing one trial. He's facing 3 at the same time, in 3 different places, under 3 different legal systems. First, there's the New York State case, second-degree murder, along with weapons charges. This is the one moving fastest, with jury selection currently set to begin in September. Second, there's the federal case, and this one's serious for a very specific reason. Stalking charges tied to Thompson's killing, carrying a maximum sentence of life without parole. Prosecutors originally pursued this as a death penalty case, but a judge later dropped the murder and weapons counts from the federal indictment, effectively taking execution off the table. The federal trial is now scheduled to begin in January, with jury selection starting first and opening statements shortly after. And third, there's a separate state case in Pennsylvania, tied to the fake ID and the weapon he was carrying when he was arrested at that McDonald's. 3 courtrooms, 3 sets of lawyers, and one very unusual defense team led by attorney Karen Friedman Agnifilo, fighting to keep evidence out of each case one piece at a time. And they've already had one real victory. A judge recently ruled that some of what police found in Mangione's backpack during that first hurried search at the McDonald's can't be used at trial because officers didn't follow proper procedure. But the second, more thorough search back at the police station, that one held up, meaning the alleged weapon itself, arguably the most damaging piece of physical evidence in the entire case, is still going to trial. There have even been quiet reports of plea negotiations with federal prosecutors at one point. Talks that, according to people familiar with the case, ultimately fell apart. Part 6. The strangest detail. And just when you think this case couldn't get any stranger, in one recent hearing, Mangione showed up to federal court over 30 minutes late. Not because he refused to leave his cell, not because of a legal delay, but because he got physically stuck in an elevator with the U.S. Marshals escorting him, shackled at both his hands and feet, while building engineers worked to pry the doors open. He finally walked into a packed courtroom wearing prison uniform, through a door usually reserved for the judge. It's a strange, almost absurd footnote in a case that has been anything but ordinary from day one. At the center of all this noise, the fan pages, the merchandise, the online debates about healthcare and justice and vigilantism, is a very simple, very human fact that's easy to lose track of. Brian Thompson was a real person, a husband, a father of 2. A man who left home one December morning for a routine work trip and never came back. Whatever you believe about the healthcare system in this country, whatever you believe about Luigi Mangione's guilt or innocence, this case forces an uncomfortable question that America still hasn't fully answered. What happens when the public starts rooting for the accused killer over the victim? The trials are coming. September in state court, January in federal court. And for the first time, a jury, not the internet, not social media, not a comment section, is going to decide what actually happened that morning in Midtown Manhattan. If you want us to keep tracking this case as it heads to trial, let us know in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Because this story is far from over.